Thank you, Robin. I'm talking to you today from Cambridge, Massachusetts, where it is just about to snow. So we're not quite to spring yet, but we can smell it around the corner. Today we will enjoy an introduction to the Institute for Integrative Conservation at the College of William and Mary, which is a little bit outside our boundaries of New England, but still on the eastern side of the North American continent. So Rob, we're very glad to have you with us. Today, Dr. Robert Rose, who has extensive experience in GIS technology prior to his experience at William and Mary, he was at the Wildlife Conservation Society as the Assistant Director of Conservation Support, which provided technical support and training to conservation programs around the globe. His specialty is GIS. And today, Rob will discuss the Institute's programs. We understand that the definition of integrative conservation, the Institute's foundational activities, and the emerging initiatives, including a proposal to support United States land trusts and the development of a next generation conservation capacity platform. In addition, Rob will discuss opportunities to engage IIC faculty at William and Mary, as well as students on collaborative conservation projects. So Rob, it's very nice to have you with us today, and I give you the platform.
Thank you so much. Thank you much for that introduction, and for both of you for inviting me to speak today. I'm thrilled to get a chance to share a little bit about the Institute with you all and answer any questions that you may have. Certainly the goal of ours is to increase opportunities to partner with external organizations, and I hope we can come up with some ideas of how that could maybe happen in the future. So a little bit more about me. I am a conservation geographer. I did my PhD at University of Wisconsin in geography before going to the Wildlife Conservation Society. And I spent 7 years there, as Jim said, as the assistant director of a team called Conservation Support. Some of you may know my boss, David Wilkie, of the time. He actually works out of Waltham, so maybe you've come across him. And a lot of people in conservation know him. He's been around for a long time. In 2015, I came over to William and Mary as the director of the Center for Geospatial Analysis, which is really a support hub that provides GIS and remote sensing teaching and support in the entire William and Mary campus. And in 2020, I moved over to the IIC, and in a moment I'll talk about the launch of that and how that happened. I will note that I'm coming to you from Williamsburg, Virginia, where it's a cold 48 degrees. 48 degrees is pretty cold for us. So I just wanted to mention that. I know how different it is living up in Boston. So we can jump to the slides. And maybe just go to the next slide would be great. So a little bit about the Institute for Integrative Conservation. We were approached by an alumna, I should say William and Mary was approached by an alumna in 2018 to ask what we were doing in conservation. And this is a person who has a long history of working with conservation organizations and is really committed to improving conservation on the ground. And while they didn't give us a lot of direction, they asked for a proposal that did something new in conservation at William and Mary. And my background working for a conservation organization for 7 years, one of the takeaway messages that I always had, especially when we tried to collaborate with universities, and a lot of us were adjunct at Columbia at the time since we were just based up in the Bronx, was that those partnerships between academia and conservation never tended to be really fruitful for the conservation organization. Typically, the research was really driven by the faculty member and the grants or role that they played in terms of research. And the outcomes tended to be papers. And sometimes it helped conservation and sometimes it didn't. So myself and my partner, who's now the faculty director, John Swaddle, kind of sat down and mulled over that idea of how could we change that dynamic? How could we restructure how academia can partner with conservation to really affect conservation on the ground? And that's what we proposed. And the donor liked it, but asked us to include ideas on improving diversity and conservation leadership. And so we included some of those ideas, including our major, which I'll talk about in a moment. The donor really liked what we proposed, asked for a 10-year budget, which we gave to them. And once that was approved, we launched in January of 2020. It's sort of, John and I consider ourselves very lucky. You don't often have that type of opportunity. I think the proposal process took us about 6 months from start to finish, where we had an agreement in place. The point that the donor made was this wasn't going to be a 3-year ramp up to doing things. They wanted things to happen right away. And the good news was we had an administration that was very supportive of us doing something a little different at the university level that hadn't been done before. And that really focuses on the structure of the IIC. So we don't sit in a department, we actually sit under the provost's office. And the reason we wanted to do that was because we felt that our approach to integrative conservation, which I'll define in a moment, works best when we could work with any school or department on campus. So William & Mary has 5 schools: arts and sciences, business, law, education, and the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. And we felt it was better for conservation and better for our goals if we sat outside of those schools. And that's really where we are right now and how we've set up. The university was very supportive of this idea, but it means trying to find new processes at the university in order to help us work like a department, even though we're non-departmental. So what was it about William & Mary? Why did the donor come to us? Well, certainly we have capacity and expertise across many different areas of what we call integrative conservation, and I'll go through some of those areas in a moment. And certainly strengths in things like biology, environmental science, geospatial and data science, even political sciences. What is, I think, our greatest asset at William & Mary is our students, and I'm really focusing on our undergraduate population. They're incredibly diverse and engaged. They want to do good things for the earth. And we're sort of tapping into their motivation to be involved with opportunities where they feel like they're directly contributing to some global improvement, in this case, conservation. We also have a culture of partnering with undergrads for research. So most of our undergraduates actually conduct research projects with faculty during their time, and it's really ingrained in the culture of William & Mary. Part of what also helped is that I have strong ties and have maintained strong ties to the conservation community. And when we launched, a big part of our launch has been to now go out and build partnerships with external partners. Next slide, please. So it's important and useful, I think, to define what we mean by integrative conservation. It's a term we're hearing more and more. And certainly when we started thinking about this, we recognize the negative impact humans have on ecosystems and biodiversity worldwide. We all know that, we understand that. But we also understand how we are dependent on regulating, functioning, provisioning, and the cultural services provided by ecosystems. And we wanted to begin to bring that together in what we call an integrative approach to conservation, because we recognize that all conservation problems are people problems, and human well-being is dependent on the well-being of the planet. They're integrated entirely in a way that we need to consider both aspects of that if we really want to affect conservation outcomes. So integrative conservation is a holistic approach that acknowledges that enmeshment of human and natural systems and the diversity of perspectives within the meshwork of life. These perspectives can include worldviews, intellectual domains, academic disciplines, geographies, cultures, research approaches, socioeconomic positioning, generational perspectives, and more. And we wanted to try to bring those all together as we think about solutions-based approaches to conservation. So integrative conservation integrates these different perspectives into conservation research and practice. It leverages expertise from across disciplines and sectors, blends diverse knowledge systems, and hopefully fosters collaboration between academia, public and private sectors, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Next slide, please. So the IAC is really trying to cultivate and mobilize an inclusive community of leaders to conduct the integrative research needed to address complex environmental issues and to prepare that next generation of diverse, effective, and bold conservation leaders. And one of the things that we started right away was to develop a strategic plan. We put together an amazing advisory board of conservation professionals, conservation leaders, and brought them together to really help us in those first 2 years to launch the IAC, define who we are, and develop this strategic plan. And so now we have this, we've defined a 5-year strategic plan to translate our mission, vision, modes, and values into a set of specific objectives that, if implemented, will collectively address the broader IAC goal to build the capacity of the conservation community and to advance integrative conservation solutions around the globe. And so here I've shared with you our mission, vision, and values statements. And through this process of developing the strategic plan, we articulated these mission, vision, and values, which we really on a daily basis strive to emulate. And through this process, we identified 4 explicit and interconnected objectives that we will use to reach our overall mission. And those objectives include: 1, build a diverse network of integrative conservation actors to partner with the IAC. And this is really critical. This is what we've been doing for the past 2 years or more. And what I hope to talk to you a little bit more about today. We look for partners in conservation to bring us challenges. That way we know that the research we take on is directly applicable to the work that's being done on the ground for conservation. And our solutions will hopefully advance those conservation applications. And it's all done entirely through partnerships. We don't come up really with projects on our own and say, oh, we want to study this or we want to work in this area. It's everything that we do is built around this network of partners. And those partners aren't just conservation organizations. They include public entities, state and federal entities. I'll share a project with you in a moment that was done with USGS and Fish and Wildlife. They include private corporations. And so we have a very diverse idea of what we even mean by partners. We are now bringing some faculty members into this growing pool of partners as a way to support their conservation work and research, as long as there is a conservation outcome as part of that research agenda. Our second strategic objective is to grow and nurture diverse talent in conservation. And we're doing that through a number of ways, and I'll talk about both our major that we're launching next fall, as well as our Summer Conservation Institute. Third, through these joint ventures with conservation partners, we really hope to establish long-term field sites that foster place-based learning and serve as demonstrations for in situ integrated conservation. And we're still kind of working up to this idea of having long-term on-the-ground conservation partners that are considered as joint ventures, that we're working together to raise funds to support the conservation project. The teaching and learning that we bring to our classroom will be directly tied to these field-based conservation programs. And we hope that they can be seen as long-term research labs, research and study labs around integrative conservation. And then 4, through partnerships among researchers, conservation practitioners, and local communities, connect knowledge and action in conservation. So make that explicit connection between knowledge generated at a university to conservation action on the ground. And that is addressing one of those gaps that I saw when I was at the Wildlife Conservation Society. So we intend to achieve these objectives by bringing together global expertise, diverse perspectives, and an entrepreneurial mindset to identify and address immediate and emerging issues in our rapidly changing environment. Second, we are strengthening the connections among people, communities, and nature to prepare the next generation of bold, compassionate, and principled conservation leaders to adapt and respond quickly to the challenges as they arise. Next slide, please. So here's our team. Here's our current team. We're still growing. We really started as a team of 2. It was myself and John Swallow, our faculty director. He's a biologist, does a lot of work on human-wildlife conflicts, and is now studying ways to minimize the impact of bird strikes on glass. In addition to myself and John, We have added our first two faculty, Dr. Maria DeSanta Vicker and Dr. Fernando Galeana Rodriguez. They joined us in the fall of 2021, so they're just in their second semester here. They enrich our critical understanding of diverse worldviews and conservation perspectives and draw attention to the intersection between conservation and social justice. In the coming months, we're going to add our third faculty member, who's going to be a geospatial data scientist, to support a lot of what our partners are bringing to us, which are geospatial projects. Both Fernando and Mar are experts in environmental justice, and Fernando sits with a joint appointment in sociology, while Mara sits with a joint appointment in anthropology. It's one of the little challenges that we have is we can't hire tenure track faculty directly into the IIC. They have to be associated with a school and a department. Erica Garut works closely with our faculty and partners to build collaborative research partnerships and really match students to applied research with those partners and faculty mentors. She also teaches and mentors students directly in the conservation research program, which I'll get to shortly. Like I said, I'll talk more about that in a moment. Craig Anzalone is out of our advancement office. He really leads our fundraising effort, and we're going to be hiring another person, an assistant director of development. Like I said, from the start, we have 10 years of funding, and we're starting now to think about what sustainability looks like past those 10 years and need to be raising those funds to make sure that after 10 years, we don't just close our doors and say, thanks for the run, it was great. We have other things to do. Catherine Francillo is our administrative coordinator, kind of keeps us all in check. We've also recently added Dr. Ali Sabo. She's the program manager for the Integrative Conservation Clinic. This is another one of our new initiatives that I'll speak to in a moment. And finally, we just added our communications program manager, Dr. Anita Hagee Ferguson. She is working on establishing the IIC brand and redesigning our website. She works to enhance inclusive conservation communications that do integrate across different ways of knowing. Next slide, please. So we do advance our strategic objectives through traditional education, providing tools and resources, supporting interdisciplinary collaborative research, and supporting impactful conservation projects through building our partner network. And so I'm going to kind of touch on some of the different components of these four aspects. Let's see, I'm just going through my notes. Why don't we jump to the next slide, and I could talk a little bit about our major, which is launching this fall. So this is the layout of our major. And the idea here is we're building into our major the way we think about integrative conservation. So you could see the types of classes that students would be expected to take. They include things that you might get in a traditional conservation biology program, like geospatial techniques, science and quantitative analysis, biology and conservation planning. But we bring in the integrative approach by having them take classes on things like ethics and environmental justice, understanding it and bringing in diversity of voices into conservation. Even things like business processes and marketing and communication are going to become very important to what our students are learning through this program. And down the center is kind of is the spine of the way we think about our program. And it is that sort of field-based practical research experience with conservation partners. And this is where we hope to build those long-term field sites where we can engage these partners in both teaching and learning of integrative conservation. Next slide, please. I want to talk about the conservation research program because this is really become a hallmark of what we're doing. This really launched in 2019, the summer of 2019, where our director of undergraduate research came to me and said, can we find 4 partners who want to have some support conducting some geospatial research? And we quickly found 4 partners. They included American Bird Conservancy, Rainforest Trust, Conservation International, and Wildlife Conservation Society. And we had students working for 1 summer. What we've done with Erica coming on as the program manager is really expanded this program. And so the CRP, or Conservation Research Program, is designed to bring together William & Mary students, faculty, and external conservation partners to first conduct applied research needed to advance real-world conservation outcomes, and two, to provide an opportunity for our students to build both research, leadership, and conservation skills that we hope they'll carry with them through their careers in conservation. And so the process really matches William & Mary expertise, both with students and faculty, to the needs of the conservation community. And so we have a RFP program where we send out an RFP. It's going to go out in maybe the next month. And it's a short proposal. We just ask the partner to identify the project that they would like to focus on, talk a little bit about the skills that a student may need to take on that project, and really make a commitment to being a strong partner to the student and to the IIC through this project. And once we identify those projects, we can then search for the students and match up the students with the projects. And the students are really committing to a year-long program. They get selected at the end of fall semester, and they start in spring, and they start immediately meeting with the partner, meeting with their William & Mary mentor. So every student also has a faculty member as a mentor. We believe this takes some of the burden off the conservation partner. And their first semester, their spring semester, is really designed to write a proposal around the project. It's a good experience for the student to write up a good research proposal. They do a literature review, they frame their question, all in collaboration with the partner. So the partner has a direct hand in shaping what the question is that they're going to answer. Over the summer, the student gets a research stipend to conduct the research, and that can include a travel stipend or travel support, and that's fully supported by the IIC. One of the reasons we're so committed to supporting our students this way is we know that financial situations can be a barrier to entering conservation. I don't know how many of you have done this. I know I have, where I was able to be a free intern to a conservation organization and basically work for no money. I had the luxury of having some support to be able to do that. But we know that building diversity in conservation means breaking down that financial barrier. And so every student that gets involved with the IIC is earning something, either research credits or a research stipend to support them over the summer. And again, this is the other reason we pay our students and support travel is we're not asking the partner to outlay the money. We want to support that. And this is another way where we think we could support conservation on the ground. Over the summer, they conduct their research, and then in the fall, they kind of write it up. They work with the partner to develop whatever the final product is. It could be just a report or a set of objectives or opportunities for the conservation partner. I know 2 of my students out of 6 from last year are actually submitting papers for publication out of their projects. Sometimes they create story maps. It just really depends on what the partner wants. We've had podcasts created. So it's really designed to support the partner needs. So in 2022, we now have 18 students. So this is our current program. We have 18 students on 15 faculty mentors. With, I think, 15 different conservation partners. They include local and global partners. And so it's really an incredible program. I think one of the things that strikes me is that we have partners that have come back now for their 3rd year. And so it's a signpost to me that we're actually doing something that is useful for the conservation partner. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share, just so you can get a sense of the types of projects that we're taking on, because there's a really broad range. And again, if we're thinking about integrative conservation, we want there to be a broad range of opportunities for partners to get involved, but also a broad range of students who can get involved. So here you just see 4 of the students. I think there were 15 last year in the program, and you can see the diversity in their majors and the types of projects they take on. Christina, who I worked with, was working with Conservation International to basically develop a GIS database of lands managed by Indigenous peoples and use that database to understand how they protect ecosystem services around the globe. That's one of the papers that's being published right now. We had a student from Government and Theater who worked with our Highlands location, which is James Monroe's former house out near Charlottesville, to develop a proposal for a conservation laboratory at the Highlands location. Madeline Bertinoli worked with a partner in Ecuador and a partner at Tulane University to develop a business plan around sustainable vanilla in Ecuador. And probably my favorite project, the one with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and USGS. And part of the reason it's my favorite project is because I'm a remote sensor by training, but also Emilio is one of the easier students I've ever had to work with. He was so motivated and worked so hard on this project. U.S. Fish and Wildlife actually tried to get him to come back for another year project. Unfortunately, he was going off to Cambridge for study abroad. But the project they brought to us, and the project that was really successful, was using machine learning to monitor sandhill cranes on the Platte River. So they roost every spring. U.S. Fish and Wildlife had been doing overflights to count the sandhill cranes as part of their management strategy. And they knew they needed to streamline their approach. So they've been taking thermal imagery, and Emilio developed the methodology to actually count the sandhill cranes from the thermal images. And so what he's providing to them is a guide on how to continue to use machine learning as a tool to count sandhill cranes, but a way to expand that out to count other wildlife species. That's another paper I think he's already submitted that, as a matter of fact. He was done with his research in December, and by the end of January, he had his paper submitted. So that's the kind of students we end up having at William & Mary. They're pretty incredible. Next slide, please. So I want to jump over to some of our new initiatives that were outside the bounds of our original proposal. They extend our opportunities, and they really have come up because we've had these opportunities brought to us by partners. And the first one is this, what we're calling the Integrative Conservation Clinic. And the idea here is to develop an open source online platform to address that knowledge implementation gap. And really it's designed for conservation practitioners to come answer a series of questions and get sort of a tailored solution to conservation capacity development. And this is going to be integrated into other opportunities that we're developing around conservation leadership. Next slide, please. So we hired Ali Sabo to run this program, and so she works at the ISC, but this is a kind of a network of partners around the globe. And the idea here is to bring together, through research, an understanding of user needs. And some of those surveys have already been conducted, and now they're conducting survey user interviews, and really bring together a content development team. So a panel of experts from universities, NGOs, and other areas in 21 different topics, and then begin developing the website and doing some pilot testing. San Diego Zoo and Smithsonian are going to be doing that pilot testing, while we also work with communities to try it out to see if this is meeting needs for capacity development. Next slide, please. Another new initiative is what we're calling, well, we don't have it, we haven't set on a name yet, but we're right now calling it the Summer Conservation Leadership Academy. And again, the idea here is to find a way to build conservation leadership skills in the places that matter most. So where we see an opportunity to build diversity in conservation is by giving people who are living and working in areas where conservation matters. We're thinking about a lot of rainforest countries, developing countries, where people who work at those conservation organizations often take an undergraduate program in conservation biology or conservation, and that's about all they get. So they often don't have the same opportunity to move into leadership positions with their conservation organizations. So we're designing the Summer Conservation Institute to fill some of that gap, to find ways to bring young conservationists or early career conservationists from around the globe to William & Mary to study alongside our students and faculty and other professionals, and build skills like conflict management and how to write a proposal and how to manage a budget, things that they wouldn't normally get in their undergraduate career. And we really believe this is one way to affect diversity at those upper levels of conservation programs. Our goal is to provide scholarship funds for a fair number of participants, while we expand the opportunity to others who can actually pay to attend this Summer Conservation Institute. Next slide, please. The third new initiative is what we call Adopt a Land Trust initiative. And this really launched through my relationship with Brees Robertson, who is at the Lincoln Institute and has a long history of working with land trust organizations. And we recognize that land trust will play a key role in meeting the 30 by 30 land protection goals by working with private landowners to create those conservation easements that are going to be critical to meeting those goals. But we also see a gap in terms of using good data to make data-driven decisions about where to target conservation easements. And so last year, Brees brought an idea to the Institute, and I had 2 students work on a project for the Santa Fe Conservation Trust. They had 2 ideas. They wanted to develop a really great story map around the work that they do as a way to raise funds and conduct an analysis that I think some of you may have been involved with, that it looks at building equity and inclusion in the land trust process. So is there a way we can use GIS and socioeconomic indicators to identify areas that a land trust organization might look towards if they want to build some more inclusiveness into the land trust process? And so the initiative started there, but we see a real opportunity to expand that out. And we're in the process of writing the proposal for this initiative. And the idea is that this initiative will combine sort of a network of volunteers, people like myself and other faculty members who are looking for opportunities to get students engaged with external projects. So to bring together those folks as well as students with geospatial expertise to work with local land trusts to create geospatial products that support efforts towards those 30 by 30 goals. They will work through the Adopt a Land Trust platform that we hope to build in partnership with Esri as an ArcGIS hub that will include data maps and applications, as well as templates and instructions on how to develop data-driven products. So for example, if an organization wants to do an analysis of where they might focus if they want to expand inclusiveness in their program, that platform will be available to them, the products will be available to them, and the methodology will be available to them. So it makes that data-driven approach much easier. So certainly much of the data exists, but they haven't been comprehensively organized for the specific purpose of helping land trusts develop geospatial products. And we hope to pair them with students and volunteers as a coordinated initiative. The goal is to actually, as well, hire people that will sort of lead on this project over the next 10 years as we push towards the 30 by 30 goals. We do believe that many academic institutions will join us in this effort. It's just my involvement both with the academic GIS community as well as the Society for Conservation GIS. I'm pretty certain that we'll be able to develop that network of partners. And we've been lucky to have partners like Society for Conservation GIS and others come on board and help us and even contribute to this proposal that we're developing. In this collaboration with land trust partners and volunteers, we will design and build a land trust ArcGIS hub that will contain all necessary data applications and tutorials to answer this question. So a big part of what we see happening is capacity development, both in terms of the volunteers who are working for this, as well as for the land trust organizations to better understand how to use some of these data and these tools. Next slide, please. And just because I think I've timed it pretty well, I just wanted to end with some ideas on how to get involved. So first and foremost, we'd love to partner on projects. We're always looking for new partners to bring ideas on collaborative projects that touch on any area of what we think of as integrative conservation. Ideally, our projects will take a more integrative approach, but we certainly know that for our student projects, pieces of integrative conservation will lead up to the entire piece of the way we think about integrative conservation. And so bringing new projects and new partnerships to the IIC is incredibly valuable for us. And so any ideas for projects, we're always happy to jump on a call, talk a little more about the program or other opportunities to engage us in partnerships. And see what might potentially fit for one of our programs. There's also ways to mentor students. We're always looking for additional mentors. Our idea here really is that we want to make any opportunity to work with the IIC sort of a high reward, low input opportunity for our conservation partners. I certainly remember when I was sitting in our GIS lab at WCS and someone came along and said, here, I have an intern for you for the summer. Teach them some GIS and they're going to do great work for you. And they just left them there. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? Because the time it takes to teach someone GIS and get them involved in a project is typically way longer than it would take for me to do the project. And as much as I like teaching GIS, I often didn't have the luxury of time like that. And so our approach here is to change that dynamic. Like I said, we mentor all our students, but we'd always be excited to have other mentors on some of these projects. And they could be project mentors, but they could also be mentors that our students look for when they're thinking about careers in conservation. They want to identify different opportunities or even ask direction about grad school. So we have a way to kind of sign up as a mentor, and sometimes we pair our students that have a particular question with some of those mentors. If we want to think about longer research collaboration projects, we'd certainly be eager to talk about that as well. If there are ways to collaborate with folks on even writing proposal and raising funds that would fund a joint project, we'd be thrilled to talk about that as well. There's other opportunities, and they can include just join our listserv, and you could hear more about what we do on a regular basis. Most of our events tend to be virtual events, so we have a conservation speaker series. This year it's focused on Indigenous voices in conservation. We've had an incredible series of lectures. Next year we're going to talk about rethinking protected areas and how we go about a process of breaking down our ideas of fortress conservation and begin thinking about a more integrative approach. We have a website, we have, what is that one? Instagram, we have LinkedIn. We even have a podcast that we launched that tells some really interesting conservation stories. The first year was all about shad fisheries with the local Virginia Indian tribe. This past year was talking to 4 women in conservation leadership positions. And there are 4 really fantastic interviews talking about how they became leaders in the conservation community. And so I'm going to end there, and I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any more information that I can about the ISE. But I do want to thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to listen to me go on about all the work that we're trying to do. Thank you.
Rob, that was terrific, and we have a very intimate group here today. So I invite people to please put their questions in the question area, but also just if you want to raise your hand and ask a question directly to Rob, please do that. We have 2 questions in the queue right now.
Sure.
One is from Laura Johnson, former chair of the board of the Land Trust Alliance and president of the Mass Audubon Society. Laura asks, have you been in touch with the Land Trust Alliance about your Adopt a Land Trust initiative?
Yeah, we've been in close contact with Aaron Haskett at the Land Trust Alliance. He's given us a ton of great feedback, and we hope to, one, include the Land Trust Alliance as a partner on this, but it's going to take some time to build, and I think they're being very sensitive about their role in all of this, but I think we'll build to that. But we have been in regular communication. Brice knows him well, and so those conversations have been ongoing. He's read our proposal and given us a lot of great feedback on that.
Well, you're lucky to have Brice. She's a colleague of mine at the Lincoln Institute.
Oh, she's amazing.
She is amazing, and she knows so many people in the conservation field in this country and abroad. So
yeah, and she just wrote a book on GIS.
And she just wrote a book published by Esri on GIS.
Yeah, how cool is that? Now, I feel incredibly lucky that Brice reached out to me. We go back a ways through Society for Conservation GIS, and I was a former president of SCGIS and sit on the board, so I have close ties to SCGIS. And back in the day when we used to be able to get together for annual meetings, it was always a great opportunity to meet and talk to people like Brice. And we've sort of kept in touch, and I was just thrilled when she brought this 1 semester project, and I could share the link afterwards to the Santa Fe Conservation Trust story map, because honestly, it's one way that we've really gotten engaged with partners is to create story maps. They're great 1 semester projects. Our students love making them, and they're really good at making them, way better than I am at making story maps. And the partners love it because they get a website and we're happy to host it. They get a website that they can share with partners, share on their own website. that kind of tells their story in any way they want. So we've worked with the River Ecology Project out of the Bay Area. We've worked with some artists to develop story maps on the Migrating Mural Project. We're working on a few more over the next year, one for the city of Richmond. So it's kind of a constant, I could build a whole production line on story maps, given the interest that we have and the students that want to work on them.
Yeah, the importance of narratives is really hard to overestimate. It's so hard to get people to understand what you're doing without a good story, and I think story maps are a great way to do that.
Yeah, we're working, along with our year-long projects, last year we had so many projects proposed, and our capacity only lets us take on about 16. But there were a handful of them that were GIS projects that I knew I could probably get done in a semester if I framed them right. So I basically started a conservation GIS lab here, and I have 12 students that signed up for research credit, and they're working on these 7 projects. And a handful of those are story maps, including story maps for IUCN species specialty groups, as a way for them to communicate their work that they're doing. And those are all volunteer organizations, so they don't have the capacity to do it. So we're thrilled to step in and give students an opportunity to work with them.
Now, William & Mary is predominantly an undergraduate institution, right?
It is. We have some graduate programs, and we often get asked if we'll have a graduate program, and maybe we will someday. But we feel pretty confident, and I'd be happy to share we have links to video presentations that our undergraduates, at least through our conservation research program, are doing master's level research work. We feel really confident saying that. We feel confident going to our partners and saying, you can trust these undergraduates to commit to this research and provide outcomes that are incredibly useful. And overwhelmingly, we've seen a success through that approach.
Are any of your students going on to graduate programs in related fields?
Yeah, they're starting to. We're just now seeing our first wave of students beginning to graduate. We're going to have our first graduation ceremony this spring, and it's really for students who spent a year with us conducting research. And I think there's about 4 students. Our students often get, for whatever reason, consultants really like coming to William & Mary and grabbing our students. So places like Deloitte & Touche, Booz Allen Hamilton, a lot of our students get sucked up into those programs because they come here, recruit, they offer a fair bit of money as your starting salary. But we do have some going to grad school, and I kind of try to convince them to go off and study geography if they're interested in conservation.
Right. So Maria Cristina Wayland Vieira asks, Brazilian Confederation of Private Nature Reserves. Have you developed any projects in Brazil? Oh, I guess she's from the Brazilian Confederation of Private Nature Reserves. Have you developed any projects in Brazil related to protected areas and private nature reserves?
No, we'd be eager to. We did work on a project last year. It was actually brought to us by Celine Cousteau. She had been working with some tribes in northern Brazil and is trying to launch a conservation project there. And she actually did a documentary on these people and works closely with some of the people there. And the idea of the project was to see if we could bring indigenous voices into conservation education for, I think it was targeted for high school students. So the student worked through this documentary and with Celine Cousteau to develop sort of a toolkit of learning resources that are directly integrating indigenous voices into conservation. And so that is a project that is related to Brazil. We didn't send any students there for that one. We hope that it might be a longer term project for us, but we would be thrilled and eager to talk about other opportunities.
Well, I will offer you on screen one opportunity, which is that as your students go on and are interested in being outside the United States, we have lots and lots of civic sector land conservation organizations affiliated with the International Land Conservation Network that might be quite interested, like Maria Cristina is, in deploying students with those kind of talents in the field. And all they have to do is compete with Deloitte and Booz Allen, so no problem.
How would our students, like, what's the matchup process? Is there a way that we can facilitate that matchup process?
I have not figured that out yet, except that we have webinars and especially global congresses where people from 100 countries get together to talk about conservation challenges.
Okay, I'm going to look into that, because a big part of our motivation, we're just getting our first students to graduate, but we really need to be thinking what is next for our students, and figuring out how to build that pipeline is incredibly important to us, and it's going to take working with partners. I think one of our other challenges is having organizations comfortable with hiring undergrads.
Right.
I know when I was at WCS, I know Conservation International, the bigger NGOs, it's really hard to get a job there as an undergrad in conservation. They want a master's minimum, and they don't even look at CVs that don't have that MS or PhD on it. And so we are thinking about how to convince them otherwise, that they're missing a really important opportunity here.
Well, so does William and Mary have any 5-year programs that graduate people into master's programs?
Yeah, I think there is 1 or 2 5-year programs, and that's what we've discussed. If we think about a master's program, that it would just be a 5-year master's.
Right.
Yeah. No,
and
I think
one extra year on an undergraduate program. So
yeah, I think that's exactly the way we want to think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I am not seeing any more questions.
Jim, David has his hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry. David, go ahead. Can you turn off your mute and put your video on and ask your question?
I guess I'm videoless, but I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
We hear you. And so, Rob, this is David Foster, who's the recently retired director of the Harvard Forest and still quite engaged in conservation activities at Heisted Foundation and
Excellent.
other venues.
Well, it's nice to meet you. And the methodology that we're using around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the land trust process came from folks at Harvard Forest.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to meet you. Fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
I've been really enthusiastic about this program ever since I first heard it of it. So I've got 2 questions. One is inward looking and one is outward looking from your perspective. The outward looking one a little bit piggybacks on Laura's question, which is, I know that you've been conversing with Marianne and Jim, and so you know a bit at least about Alpine, Academics for Land Protection in New England, and the efforts that we've made to bring together, as many colleges and universities in the region. And that's attracted, a lot of interest from different schools outside of the region. So the question really is, how do we, as a collective of groups that are trying to advance this type of work that we are doing here in New England and working through Wildlands and Woodlands, and you're doing out of William and Mary, how do we best advance this nationally, not in terms of ourselves building some big entity, but just to assemble more voices in support of these kinds of activities that will help to both advance land conservation broadly, but also change some of the discussion at academic institutions. And so then my internal question is, what are you doing and how effective is it to actually promulgate this internally through your college?
Ooh, excellent questions. And I can't say that I have a great answer for you, because I guess let me say, I hope that we're at the beginning of those really important discussions. And certainly what you all have built for New England, it should be a model for a lot of the way you think you or we or the collective thinks about expanding this, because I think what you're getting at is incredibly important. This idea that we all need to be working towards this greater goal if we hope to change the direction of conservation on the planet and reverse the trends that we're seeing. And, we had on our advisory board at our first meeting, people who'd been working in conservation for 50 years basically say we failed. And so figuring out how to have this conversation that goes beyond sort of the individual academic units, conservation NGOs, and begins to bring that discussion together we're at a critical juncture point for that. And I think it starts by having these conversations and saying there is a need for it, and finding people who are like-minded, who have similar goals. And I think a sort of a shared sense of purpose, certainly that's the approach that we take. We don't think of what we're doing as something that should be at William and Mary and we're going to hold tight to whatever we develop. We look very outward. We want to think about taking what we learn and sharing it with anybody and everybody who will listen. So finding like-minded people who want to have that conversation and keep that conversation just going, and then think about how we can sort of build partnerships and keep building out from that. You know, we see our growing network of partners, and I think the reason we see this growing network of partners is because we've hit on something that is important to our partners and they believe can make a difference in conservation. We're not taking the traditional approach where we're looking for opportunities to conduct research and we walk away. One example is that we're starting to work with Virginia tribes on different projects. And the way we started this relationship is by offering some GIS training. And even in our work with Virginia tribes, we're changing the discussion around what it means to even partner with a Virginia tribe. We're not conducting research on the tribes or about the tribes. We're working with the tribes to develop ideas and projects that support what they want to do. And it's just a matter, to me, it's a matter of finding those conversation points and those touch points and bringing those people who are like-minded together. And I think I hope this conversation is a start. I know we're a little bit out of your network area, but it doesn't mean we can't continue to have conversations and collaborate on projects. And maybe a project is a bit of a think tank where we're trying to figure out how to expand this network of collectives of people who want to do this type of work. So
Good idea.
that might not be as satisfying as I hope you wanted, but I think that's where we are right now. Internally, the response has been honestly varied. You know, we have a lot of great response and support from our leadership, from the president to the provost, through our deans. And a lot of faculty are seeing an opportunity to come and partner with us. We're offering to fund students to work on their research projects as long as they have this applied conservation outcome. Certainly, if you've been in a university setting, you know how jealousies can kind of work their way across the university. And some of that comes up. You would expect that when an organization gets launched out of nowhere with $20 million in their pocket. Like, we knew that was going to happen, but we're just trying to keep those conversations going. We go to departmental meetings, talk about what we're doing and talk about opportunities to partner with us. We funded our first year-long research partnership with a faculty member in anthropology. We're basically paying for the faculty members that sit in anthropology and sociology, so they get an extra faculty member and teaching out of it without having to pay for anything. So we're working on that too, and it's just going to take time.
Yeah, so I mean, my thinking behind that, you know, kind of comes from the way that I converse. I teach a course called Conservation Ecology and Practice, which is, you know, really identical to the kind of content and motivations of everything you've been talking about. And one of the first things that I tell students and tell all the students who write to me about it is that there is no disciplinary track to conservation.
No.
Every part of a college and university, every department in a college and university has something to offer to the field of conservation.
Yes.
And that's always a surprise to students because they don't necessarily think if they're coming out of economics or if they're coming out of sociology or they're coming out of arts or design that or religion, that they will have something to offer to conservation. But of course they do. And so there's a big challenge to inform not just the students, but the faculty and the departments themselves, because they don't necessarily see that either.
It's easier with the students, right?
Yeah.
Emilio is a computer scientist and data scientist and an econ major. He saw this project and he was so excited about it. And now to listen to him talk about conservation is just incredible. And they understand that they can contribute even though they want to study data science. I mean, for me, my career sort of reflects that. I like a lot of people wanted to be that field conservationist, trudging through. I wanted to be Mike Fay, right? Everybody in WCS wanted to be Mike Fay. And I did my first field work when I was in grad school. I got sent to Cameroon. We were studying human wildlife conflict. I got to spend weeks in the forest there. I hated it. I was a total failure at field-based conservation. And so I found my role sitting behind a computer doing GIS and remote sensing for conservation applications. It was a different path, but I'm really lucky that I found it because it's what I'm good at.
So Rob, I have a last question for you. This is a great introduction to what you're doing, and I'm sure that there are going to be ways to collaborate. For example, Maria Christina asks, who asked the earlier question, how can we contact your organization and send invitations to your students to develop conservation projects in private nature reserves in Brazil?
Yeah, so I'm just you have my email address. I'll put it in the chat and email me. I'll set up the conversation. I'll connect you with with Erica Garud, who runs our conservation research program. And let's just talk and we'll figure that out. We're in this really lucky phase. We're only 2 years old. We have a lot of flexibility in what we do and how we do it. We have a donor who doesn't want to have a lot of oversight and firsthand interaction with what we do. And we're even flexible with how our money is spent. And so we would love the opportunity. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going to read it off, Rob. It's RAROSE, RAROSE 01 at wm.edu.
There it is. Now I got it. I got it in the right location too in chat. Let's just talk. Honestly, we'd be thrilled to have a conversation with you and figure out what could work. We'd be incredibly excited about partnering with you on projects in Brazil.
She's got it.
Excellent.
David Foster responded, what a terrific program and initiative. I'd just like to reiterate that in the Lincoln Institute and at Alpine, you have some powerful collaborators. So let's keep the conversations going. I know, Rob,
Absolutely.
We're going to figure out a way for the ILCN to take advantage of everything that's going on at William and Mary. So,
excellent. Well, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate y'all coming out and listening to me.
Thanks so much, Rob.
And we will we'll be in touch soon.
Great. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.